He can say honest.
And the pilot of that plane, Captain Tom Pinardo, talked on the flight with the pilot of the U.S. reconnaissance plane, about what happened after the mid-air collision that started the 11-day stalemate with China. Here is what Pinardo had to say this morning.
They probably lost anywhere from 8 to 10,000 feet in altitude coming down, recovering. During that period of time, they thought about jumping off the airplane, preparing for evacuating the airplane. Then they got the airplane under control and thought about ditching. And then the next point, they got the airplane completely under control, realized that there was an airstrip there, and that's where they directed the airplane.
Now, once the crew landed in China, access to them was restricted. They, in effect, became prisoners. And an important question is hung in the air. Did the crew have time to significantly destroy information they had been gathering, and for that matter, other information and parts of the aircraft that might be helpful to the Chinese military? U.S. military debriefers joined the crew on the flight from Guam to Hawaii, and CBS News national security correspondent David Martin at the Pentagon has heard some of what the debriefers are learning. David?
Well, this was one of the first questions they asked the crew once the plane took off from Hainan. And this time it was intelligence specialists who wanted to know in detail if the crew had been able to accomplish their emergency destruction plan, which is a very precise plan with a checkoff list. And the answer was yes, they had gone through the entire destruction list. And you have to think about that for a minute. Here's a plane, as we just heard, that had fallen 8,000 feet, had a mid-air collision, had fallen 8,000 feet. The pilot was thinking of ditching it at sea, and now he was trying to nurse it in to an airfield, yet the crew in the back has the presence of mind to go through their emergency destruct plan in the middle of what was really a near-death experience. And as a result of that, the Chinese probably still got their hands on the equipment that was on board that plane. You can't destroy the equipment when you're in a plane, or else you'll destroy the plane with it. But the really sensitive stuff, the codes, the software programs, the hard drives, that apparently was destroyed, and the Chinese probably are not going to get much use out of that.
David Martin at the Pentagon. These are live pictures now from Hickam Air Force Base in Hawaii, where the Welcome Home celebration has gathered and is beginning to gather momentum. The plane arriving from Guam, now the U.S. military plane, is on the ground, but we have not yet seen the 24 men and women crew members who were released from China last night. David Martin, if you're still with us, question, there have been any number of reports, so far as I know, totally unconfirmed, that in the immediate aftermath of the plane going down in that emergency landing at Hainan Island and the crew being taken off, that there was some consideration given by the U.S. military to possibly bombing the aircraft so the Chinese wouldn't get it. It sounds pretty far out to me, but that's out there and sort of circulating around. Do we know for a fact whether that was or was not ever considered?
I don't know for a fact, but that sounds far out to me. I certainly never heard it discussed, never heard it discussed. Particularly in the days immediately after, we thought we were going to get that thing back pretty quickly, and for at least the first day or two, we thought the Chinese might respect the plane's sovereignty. Technically, that was American territory, and they shouldn't have touched it. We didn't find out that an armed Chinese had come on the plane and taken the crew off at gunpoint until the first time that American diplomats were allowed to meet with the crew, which was, as I remember, I think the third or fourth day of this standoff. And I just never heard any kind of military action being considered as a serious option.
As we watch the C-17 taxi up, let's go quickly to CBS News correspondent Barry Peterson in Beijing. Barry, how is the crew release being played in China today? Still being played as, quote, total victory?
Well, I think it exactly is, Dan. In fact, those are the words that Chinese television is using here. And one of the joys of being a leader in a country with state-run TV is that no matter what you do, they say you did it right. That's what they're talking about. There is both a sense of stubbornness and still, surprisingly, a lot of anti-American belligerence. So while you back there in the United States are celebrating perhaps the fact that the crew is coming home, and that's a good thing here. The mood is still very much the same. They're still angry about it. They're still talking about the fact that the United States has not taken responsibility. And I think there's still problems here with the American-Chinese relationship.
Well, Barry, is there not talk in China about returning the aircraft?
The Chinese are very adamant about that. They say it's not a usual airplane, it's a military plane. They say it violated Chinese law by landing inside this Chinese territory, so therefore it is subject to Chinese law. And I got to say, Dan, the chances are more likely that you'll come visit this plane in a museum than that this plane will ever get back to America.
Barry Peterson in Beijing, and we'll be picking up that conversation a little later on. You may want to note that the U.S. Secretary of State, former hero General Powell, said on last night's CBS Evening News that there were unresolved issues and that negotiations in effect are continuing. And the inference certainly was very strongly that the United States position is the plane should be returned, and the sooner the better. But about that we'll see. At the moment, joy and celebration that the 24 young men and women whose job it was to fly a large, lumbering reconnaissance aircraft off the coast of China in international waters, and who brought the aircraft down in an extreme emergency landing on a Chinese island, are well and now home, at least home in terms that they've just landed on the soil of one of the states of the United States of America. They certainly will not feel they're completely home until they're with their loved ones. And the goal of the United States government at the moment is to get them home by Sunday, Easter at the latest. Of the 24 total in the crew, 22 members of the U.S. Navy, 1 Air Force, 1 U.S. Marine, 21 men and 3 women. They were based at the Whidbey Island Naval Air Station, Washington State. It's about 50, 55 miles north of Seattle. We'll be going there as part of this broadcast a little later on, we think. John Blackstone is covering for us there. Bill Whitaker at Hickam Air Force Base in Hawaii. Is there a large crowd gathered? Was the Air Force Base open to the public at large? How does it work there?
Well, Dan, the Air Force Base is not open to the public at large, but there is a fairly large crowd gathered here, mostly service people and a number of well-wishers here. As you can see, the large C-17 is taxiing onto the tarmac here. It is pulling up in front of the gathered crowds. There is a large contingent of media. There are many, many cameras and many, many reporters here. The Hickam Air Force Base, as you were saying, is a historic base, and they have seen their share of homecomings. Vietnam POWs were welcomed here. And this is also where the crew of the Apollo 13, that near-disastrous moon mission, were welcomed. And here we get this welcome today. Now, of course, you know, the main reason they're coming here is for these debriefings. And after we have the ceremony here, they will be whisked away to Pearl Harbor to get some much-needed rest. And then the debriefings will start tomorrow. We understand they will go from 10 o'clock in the morning until 10 p.m. in the evening. And the military wants to know exactly what happened there in China. Here we have the plane pulling up in front of the crowd. The crowd is getting a little bit restless. They want to see these folks.
Well, it may be a few minutes before...
Dan?
Yes, Bill, there may be a few minutes before we or the crowd gets to see him. It always takes a little while to get the plane taxied up, get things squared away, and then have the crew disembark. There'll be plenty of time later to discuss issues of whether the United States should continue to back China's entry into the World Trade Organization, whether the United States should continue to support Beijing as the spot for the Olympics in 2008, whether the United States needs to rethink what it is and is not doing in terms of giving Taiwan sophisticated defensive weapons, such as the Aegis-class destroyers. All of that is part of the frame around what we're seeing today. But this is basically a welcome home celebration. So those serious matters of the future of U.S. relations with the government of China, and indeed, insofar as it is different, relations of the United States with the people of China. There's no question there's been damage to U.S.-China relations. The question is how broad, how deep the damage, and how long-lasting the damage to those relations will be. And some of that may depend on whether the Chinese, in the end, give the aircraft back, or, as Barry Peterson suggested in his report, the current thinking in China, whether the Chinese say, no, we're going to keep the aircraft. You might say, well, what would they do with such a plane? Well, a museum in Beijing, or making some sort of show of it. Given the way the Chinese government negotiated over the release of these crew members, one would have to say anything is possible in terms of the aircraft itself, that is the U.S. reconnaissance plane, badly damaged, and what a heroic job the pilot of the reconnaissance plane did in getting it down. You only have to take a look at that aircraft, say, not only was it a miracle it got down, but the pilot did a tremendous job in getting it down safely on an airstrip that he had presumably never in fact seen before. May have seen it on a radar or something, but they'd never even flown over it before. And the scattered applause begins at Hickam Air Force Base in Hawaii. Bill Plant, one assumes that President Bush is watching this on television in or around the Oval Office.
And we expect that he is, and we know that he plans to call the crew, to talk to the crew members one by one, to welcome them back to the United States. But they're deliberately keeping this pretty low-key here at the White House. The president may say something as he departs for his Easter weekend in Texas, but his real interest is in talking to the crew first. His spokesman told us earlier this is the day for the crew. They don't want to overshadow it, and they particularly don't want any kind of triumphal feeling. They want to keep this, as you pointed out at the very beginning, conditions at Hickam, low-key. Low-key there, low-key here, because they do believe that they have a relationship with China to rebuild. But today's focus is definitely on the crew, and they'll be speaking to the commander-in-chief pretty quickly after they leave this aircraft. Dan?
Well, Bill, as we wait for the door to open, how does that square with yesterday's, one can only describe it as pep rally, in which the crowd was shouting in unison, whether encouraged to do so or not, USA, USA, USA. That certainly was not low-key.
Well, it wasn't low-key, and it was very much a rally sort of atmosphere, because that's what you see when the president goes on the road to sell his tax plan, which is what he was doing there. It's just like the campaign. Those folks were all primed to see the president in a state that voted for him, a lot of Republicans there, and they were really pleased that these folks were coming home. So you can't blame him, I guess, for showing a little emotion, which he did. And Dan, the emotion is now with them in Hickam.
The door opens and the crew emerges. Crisp salutes all around. The crew led by its hero pilot, who has tucked under his left arm a carefully folded flag of the United States of America. Where that flag is from, we're not quite sure. U.S. Navy Lieutenant Shane Osborne, the pilot of the reconnaissance plane. Probably will not be a lieutenant for long, given what he accomplished in getting that aircraft down. That is he with the flag under his arm. He's 26 years old, grew up in Nebraska. Parents said he always dreamed of flying. And Lieutenant Osborne's sophomore high school yearbook quoted him as saying, "I want to have a career in the Air Force someday." And he wound up a Navy flyer.
One, two, three. 1, 2.
Well, as the handshakes all around, we wanted to pause there and give you a chance to soak up the moment. Heroes return as the band plays. Lined up Ensign Richard Benzing from Brandon, Florida, Stephen Blotcher, Charlotte, North Carolina, Seaman Bradford Borland. Not sure what Borland's hometown is. Technician second class David Chica. Lieutenant J.G. John Comfort. John Comerford. I may have unintentionally slid over the He is from California. John Corson from Georgia. Seaman Jeremy Crandall from Illinois. And Lieutenant Osborne comes to the microphone. The pilot and commander of the crew.
Aloha and good morning. And it is a great morning here in Hawaii and a great day in America. On behalf of all of us in the Pacific Command, the Pacific Fleet, and the citizens of Hawaii, it's my privilege to welcome the return of this courageous air crew. You should know that we're all very proud of you for the way that you've conducted yourself these past 2 weeks and for the high spirit and professionalism you demonstrate in the service of your country every day. We're lucky to have men and women like you protecting the interests of our nation. So it's wonderful for me to have the pleasure to say both welcome back and well done to this great crew. I've got a letter here from our Secretary of Defense that I'd like to read. and it starts, welcome home. The men and women of the Department of Defense are properly proud of each of you. Throughout your days in detention, you conducted yourselves with honor and professionalism and held your heads high. America could not have had better representatives of the ideals we value. You're models for the noble work that men and women in uniform perform on behalf of their nation every day. You put your lives at risk in the service so that the citizens of a grateful nation can live their lives in peace and freedom. The President is grateful. I am grateful. America is grateful. And we welcome you back to the United States. May your reunion with family and loved ones be a joyous one indeed. And it's signed, Donald Rumsfeld. This will be a short but busy stop for you in Hawaii as you complete your mission. We know you're anxious to see your families, and President Bush has said we'll get you home before Easter, and we know how to make that happen. So now let me turn this over to Lieutenant Shane Osborne, the pilot and mission commander, for some short comments before we get on with getting you home. Thank you, sir. Shane?
Thank you. The first thing I'd like to say on the behalf of the crew is we're definitely glad to be back. Secondly, I want to assure all the families and loved ones of these 23 fine crew members that they miss them very much. They're all healthy and ready to get home. I'd like to thank everybody's support all over. We didn't hear much about it at first, but I'd like to thank the support for these past 12 days. It definitely helps. Now that we're back, we obviously have some business we need to take care of. We need to be debriefed and briefed on the situation so we can get home to our families for Easter. With that note, I'd like to start that process now so we can get home. And on behalf of Combat Reconnaissance Crew 1, I'd like to thank you once again, and God bless America.
We had been reading the names and trying to read the names of all the crew, and continuing that as the celebration goes on at Hickam Field in Hawaii. Technician First Class Joseph Edmonds. Technician Second Class Brandon Funk. Technician Second Class Scott Gidry. Technician Second Class Jason Hanser. Lieutenant Patrick Honig from La Mesa, California. Lieutenant J.G. Regina Kaufman from Pennsylvania. Aviation Machinist Mate Senior Chief Nicholas Milos. Electricians Technician Second Class Ramon Ricardo. Lieutenant J.G. Richard Payne. Technician Second Class Kenneth Richter. Lieutenant Marcia Sonnen from Pennsylvania. Lieutenant J.G. Jeffrey Vignery from Kansas. Aviation Machinist Second Class Wendy Westbrook from Ohio. Technician Third Class Rodney Young from Texas. Sergeant Richard Prey from Illinois. Sergeant Prey is with the Marines. And Senior Airman Curtis Town from the Air Force from Haywood, California. As it was designed to be, a low-key ceremony at Hickam Field in Hawaii, but one with a strong emotional undertow. And as the band plays the Stars and Stripes Forever, go to John Blackstone quickly, Whidbey Island, home base of the reconnaissance plane in Seattle. Quickly, John, what will they be coming to when they get there?
Well, Dan, the commanding officer here at the Whidbey Island Naval Air Station says this mission won't be over until the crew gets back home, and that is here. There'll be a big homecoming parade, a big party, Lots of family reunions, and of course, no secret there'll be plenty of hugs, kisses, and smiles. Dan?
John Blackstone. So the Americans are back on U.S. soil after 11 days of detention in China, where they were, in effect, hostages and prisoners. After debriefing in Hawaii, they'll return to their home base in Washington State on Saturday and spend Easter Sunday with their families. Their damaged reconnaissance plane remains in China. Damage to U.S.-China relations still to be assessed and, if possible, quickly repaired. There'll be much more about this story in your local news on this CBS station. We'll bring you in-depth coverage tonight on the CBS Evening News. Till then, Dan Rather, reporting from CBS News World Headquarters in New York. Good day.
For news 24 hours a day, CBS.com on the internet and on our interactive partner, America Online, at keyword CBS News.